Wren Street, with its pale fences and trimmed lawns, looked peaceful at a glance, but what lived behind those pastel-painted doors was anything but. Secrets stained the foundations, and one secret in particular had waited 10 years to be unearthed. It was nearly midnight when the silence was broken. Inside a 2-story home with tall windows and an ivy-covered front wall, a dim light glowed in a second-floor office. Within, a well-dressed woman in her 40s sat at a desk cluttered with handwritten notes, psychology journals, and a steaming cup of untouched tea. Her jet-black hair was parted to the left, falling neatly just past her shoulders. Worry lingered in her hazel eyes as she reviewed a single manila envelope marked in bold ink. Confidential. The envelope contained transcripts, therapy sessions she had transcribed by hand. One entry had her frozen. The handwriting was hers, but the voice on the page belonged to someone else entirely. If she opens her mouth, she dies, and if someone finds out, so will they. I've lived with this blood on my hands for 10 years, but she's threatening to expose me. The woman stared at the words in disbelief. Her fingers trembled. The clock ticked past 11:30. Outside, leaves rustled in the wind. Then came a sound, faint but sharp, like glass snapping from pressure. She stood up, barefoot on the polished wood, and moved cautiously toward the stairs. But she didn't make it far. From the shadows behind her, a figure emerged silently. One swift blow, a shatter of ceramic. A desk lamp fell, and with it, the woman. She lay motionless on the floor, blood spreading beneath her temple. Her hands, folded carefully by someone else, rested over the envelope. The next morning, flashing lights painted the house red and blue. A detective arrived on scene, tall, wearing a long overcoat, short dark hair pinned under a worn cap. The living room showed no signs of forced entry. No footprints. No open doors. But in the study upstairs, the story unfolded in blood. There it was, the envelope, a confession written in panic and ink. The detective read the transcripts aloud. The voice spoke of an old drowning. A name stood out, a teenage girl who had mysteriously died in Wren Street's lake a decade prior. The case had never been solved. Security footage from the backyard was grainy, but enough. At 11:38 p.m., a tall figure in a long overcoat and dark gloves entered the back gate. No tools. No hesitation. The person looked directly at the camera. Almost daring it to watch Dot, the image sent waves through the community. Within hours, the figure was identified. Public outrage exploded. A courtroom packed with journalists and neighbors heard a voice from a recovered audio tape. She said she'd expose me. I pushed her. I didn't mean for her to die. But once it happened, I had to make sure no one found out. Still, something didn't add up. The confession was about the drowning, not the murder upstairs. No fingerprints had been found on the lamp. No DNA under the victim's nails. The person on trial offered no defense. Just silence. No plea. No apology. The judge handed down. 5 years in a low-security prison. First-time offense. Good reputation. Pressure for closure. People wanted justice. They accepted it. They moved on. But something remained unspoken. The person who died had uncovered more than one secret. The envelope had more names, more voices, more things worth killing for. Wren Street went quiet again, until, exactly 5 months later, another body was found, and this time the killer had already served their time. Weeks passed, but unease never left the street with the trimmed lawns and blue shutters. The house where blood had been spilled was now boarded, a for sale sign crooked in the yard. Wind carried whispers, but doors remained closed. No one wanted to say it aloud. The case didn't feel overdot in a sunlit kitchen across town, A kettle whistled. A woman in her late 30s, with auburn hair tied into a loose bun, sat at a dining table covered in sympathy cards. Her eyes were puffy, a silk robe wrapped around her shoulders. On the table, a stack of unopened envelopes. Among them, one stood out, pale gray, no return address, sealed with wax dot inside. 5 black and white photographs. Each photo showed a woman, the one who died, taken from various angles, entering a coffee shop, seated in her office, walking home in the rain. All of them captured from a distance. All of them clearly taken in the weeks before the murder. One photo was different. The angle was close, too close. It showed the same woman, seated at her desk, reading files. The photo was taken from inside the house. Shock turned to horror. Woman in the silk robe dropped the envelope and ran to the sink, nausea rising. The images were turned over to investigators. The photos were printed on discontinued film stock, faded around the edges. The paper had been aged artificially. These were modern photos, styled to look old. Someone wanted them to seem like a memory, but they were recent. And they were. Deliberate dot in a gray interrogation room with humming lights overhead. A man with short gray hair and a pale blue jumpsuit leaned back in a plastic chair. Hands cuffed, he stared blankly ahead. A detective laid the photos in front of him, one by one. He smiled. I told her not to dig. The smile didn't last. The detective leaned in, voice cold. Someone else is continuing this. Who else knew? No answer. Only silence, followed by a whisper. She found more than one. The case reopened. The woman who died had kept detailed files on several former patients. Not one, but 5. Each. With secrets, each with a motive. One was a retired pastor, another a property developer. A third worked in network security. The remaining 2? Files missing. Pages torn out. That night, another body was found. Inside a quiet suburban chapel. Beneath stained glass windows glowing red from the setting sun, a man in priest's robes lay crumpled at the altar. His throat had been slit, tongue removed, blood pooled into the carpet in a perfectly symmetrical pattern. A small yellow envelope rested on his chest, sealed with black wax. Inside, a single handwritten sentence. Confession number 2, cleansed. In silence. The church doors had been locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. The body was discovered only after the organist arrived for evening service. The detective reviewed the envelope. The handwriting didn't match the confession from the court tape. It was smaller, tighter, neater. This wasn't a copycat. This was an accomplice. Worse, someone who wanted justice in their own way. The killer had served time. But someone else was still walking free. The rain wouldn't stop. A large evidence board stood pinned with crime scene photos, maps, and notes scrawled in red ink. Thread lines connected the photos of the woman who died, the priest, and 2 missing folders. The rest of the police office was quiet. Only one light flickered near the corner. A man with thick black hair combed precisely, wearing a navy coat with the collar turned up, stared at the board. Jaw clenched, fingers twitching, eyes narrowed on the 2 empty spaces marked. With black outlines, a forensic technician entered, holding a sealed plastic sleeve. Inside, a torn journal page found near the church furnace. Burned around the edges, only a few words remained. ... She said not all secrets were hers to carry. That sentence would haunt the entire department. At a small downtown cafe, tucked between 2 antique bookstores, a woman with short platinum hair in a checkered trench coat stirred her espresso. A man in a gray hoodie sat across from her, his arms crossed, eyes shifting toward the window. They weren't just meeting, they were hiding in plain sight. She opened a small leather notebook. Inside, photocopies of 3 more photos. One showed the woman who died, standing beside a man in a clean suit with gray hair smiling. Another, the same man standing in front of a gated building labeled City Archives. The third, a photo taken from inside a vehicle, pointed at a foggy cemetery gate. The woman handed the photos across the table. The man didn't take them. Instead, he said one sentence that chilled her. He was supposed to be dead. That night, at a darkened archive room 3 blocks from the mayor's office, lights flickered in the hall. Filing drawers stood open. Dust floated through a beam of light cast from a broken overhead fixture. A figure moved through the shadows, tall, dressed in a janitor's uniform, face partially hidden by a cap dot. In one hand, a folder marked Confidential, 1994 Case Reinvestigation. In the other, a sealed black envelope with a red number 3 stamped on the front. The next morning, alarms echoed through the city's financial district. Inside a glass skyscraper, security officers stormed into a penthouse law office where silence had settled. Behind a frosted glass conference door, a suited man with salt and pepper hair was slumped in a leather chair. A glass of wine half spilled. Red spilled across the white shirt. Not wine. A blade was still in the chest. A folded page sat in front of the body. The paper had one sentence written in ink. Confession number 3. Bled the system dry. Security footage showed the victim entering alone, but then, at 2:06 a.m., the screen glitched, and when the feed returned at 2:07, he was already dead. No figure, no entry, no exit. Just silence. The courtroom was filled with a tense, suffocating silence. Wooden benches packed with people leaned forward as the judge delivered the sentence. No cameras allowed. No press, only select officials. The accused stood still, motionless, beneath a long spotlight slicing through the high courtroom ceiling. Short-cropped dark hair, cleanly shaved jaw, dressed in charcoal gray prison jumpsuit. Eyes blank. No protest. No flicker of emotion. Sentenced to 20 years. But 5 months later, everything collapsed. A fire erupted at the transport facility. 2 guards found unconscious. 1 missing entirely. Security tapes corrupted. Records wiped. Only 1 clue left behind. A smudged fingerprint on a folded newspaper headline clipped to a corkboard in the locker room. Killer gets life. Confession. Or conspiracy? 5 days later, another death shook the city. Inside a luxury hotel suite, a woman with dark copper hair and a silver gown lay on a velvet chaise. Eyes open, unmoving, a glass of red wine beside her. The mirror behind cracked. No struggle. No entry recorded. Taped to the wall above the body. A torn page with 4 words. You covered the 4th. This wasn't random. This was targeted. By the time investigators connected the pattern, 3 more were gone. A man in a warehouse found with wires twisted around his hands. Head against a wall marked with tally marks. 6 strokes slashed in. Red. Another, inside a subway tunnel, face pale, back leaning against the train rail. A number burned into his chest. 4. 1 more in an elevator, collapsed under dim emergency lights, with a single note placed between his lips. Your silence. Bought time. Each time, no prints, no witnesses, no sounds. The killer, the same one who had vanished 5 months earlier, was back. The city fell into panic. Investigators searched homes, basements, construction sites, water treatment plants, anything. But the trail led nowhere. Surveillance caught nothing but static, even in high security zones. Then something even more disturbing surfaced. In an unmarked envelope delivered to the city prosecutor's desk. There was a small flash drive. No return address. Inside the drive, 7 video files. Each one showed a confession. 7 different people. all speaking directly to the camera, admitting what they'd hidden: bribery, blackmail, lies, framing others. One by one. All 7 were already dead. Only one video had a timestamp from that morning. The speaker was unknown, wearing a hooded coat, voice disguised with static. But the message ended with, "This ends when it ends. Truth bleeds." The rain poured harder than it had in weeks, soaking the streets, washing away the traces of what happened the night before. But no amount of rain could cleanse the memory from the minds of those who saw it. The latest victim was found near a bridge on the city's outskirts. No cameras, no eyewitnesses. Only the body, lying face up in the mud, throat cut clean, and a black playing card tucked under the hand. A joker. It was a new symbol. A change in the killer's pattern. Inside the precinct, tension spiraled. The investigators circled old files. The murders had resumed again with brutal precision. 2 more dead in 1 week. Each left with symbols never used before. A chess piece, a torn photo, a card. Nothing made sense. The one who had been released 5 months prior remained under surveillance, but every move was calculated. Nothing linked him to these killings directly. Yet the feeling in the air said otherwise. A deeper fear that the real killer had never truly been caught. In a private room lined with corkboards and pinned evidence. A tired figure stared at photographs under flickering fluorescent light. One image from 10 years ago was nearly faded, a photo of 5 people, all involved in a case that was buried. 1 was now dead, 2 were missing. The 4th was the recently released convict. The 5th, unknown. A file folder was pulled from the cabinet, labeled only by a black X. It contained a single sheet of paper, a surveillance report from a decade ago. It detailed a meeting in an abandoned train yard. Cash, threats, and silence. A deal. Struck to protect someone powerful. Now, someone was undoing that deal and making each of them pay at the city morgue. A pale body was wheeled under fluorescent lights. The coroner gently lifted the sheet, revealing a woman in her late 50s. Her lips were sewn shut with fine wire. Pinned to her collar was a note. "You said nothing. So now you will say nothing forever." The message was unmistakable. Back at the central square, chaos broke out as crowds gathered in front of the courthouse. A protest? No, a performance, but not the kind anyone expected. On the courthouse steps, 3 mannequins dressed in suits hung by the neck, each wearing a mask. A judge, a priest, and a detective. Attached to their feet were signs. "Truth is dead." Phones were raised. Panic erupted. But the one who planted the display had already vanished. Later that night, a trembling hand flipped through a hidden journal, its pages stained with water and old blood. Dates matched each murder. Predictions, drawings, symbols. At the end of the book was a single name. Not of a person, but of a location. An address long abandoned. A children's mental hospital shut down 20 years ago. After allegations of abuse and disappearances, an investigator arrived at the address just before dawn. The building loomed, half swallowed by vines and time. A crumbling sign out front read Eden's Reach. Inside, the air stank of mold and rust. Walls were covered in peeling paint and old crayon drawings. Footsteps echoed across a warped wooden floor. At the center of the building was a room without. Windows. Chains bolted into the walls. Dried blood stained the floor in old patterns. And in the middle of the room, a chair, a mirror, and a fresh photograph of the current lead investigator, taken only hours earlier. Who took it? Footsteps creaked in the hallway. A whisper from behind the wall. No one else was supposed to be here. Suddenly, lights cut out. Silence. Then, the soft sound of something dragging across the floor. The next scene opened in a warehouse on the edge of the docks. A group of figures sat in silence, surrounding a rusted table with a single document, the old testimony that never made it to trial, signed by someone who had since disappeared but never confirmed dead. It described torture, blackmail, and murder conducted by figures in power, covered up by a pact of silence and exchanged favors. Now, someone was punishing everyone who knew, even if they had tried to forget. That night, one more victim was found, but this time it wasn't just a killing. The body was dressed in a tailored suit, placed on a velvet armchair, hands folded, eyes wide open. A tape recorder played nearby. On it, distorted audio, whispering only 4 words over and over: "We made you forget." The next morning, newspapers didn't report the killing. Social media didn't mention it. No footage was leaked. No photos. It was as if it never happened. Inside the department, morale dropped. Some officers resigned. Others refused to speak. One investigator vanished. His desk, left untouched, had a folded piece of paper on top. A child's drawing of 5 stick figures. One circled in red. The killings stopped after that. Just like that. No more bodies. No more messages. No leads. No explanations. But fear didn't leave. Instead, it moved underground into hushed whispers, closed-door meetings, and eyes that refused to meet one another. The silence was louder than the screams had ever been. 5 months later, a new detective received a strange envelope on their desk. Inside was a photo of an old group from a mental hospital, the same one at Eden's Reach. All children. All nameless, but one face was scratched out violently. On the back, a note written in red ink: "You looked too close?" The lights in the precinct flickered and went out.